So I want to begin by saying that in conversations about the impossible, the Mexican diaspora is frequently left out, despite the fact that our culture is rife with so many impossible experiences. And so I'm just so honored to introduce AnaLouise Keating, who is working to bring to light one of the most important thinkers, I think, that really wanted to teach people that, hey, our culture is here, we have something to say, and it's deeply weird and deeply impossible. AnaLouise Keating is a professor of multicultural women's and gender studies at Texas Women's University, who focuses on uplifting womanist, feminist, and indigenous modalities of knowledge and activism, exemplified in her editorial work on the in-progress book series, Transformations, Womanist, Feminist, and Indigenous Studies, of which her upcoming book on Womanist Spiritual Activism will be a part. Dr. Keating is well known in Chicane and Latine feminist academic circles for her work alongside the late Chicana philosopher and culture critic Gloria Anzaldúa. Co-editing the visionary anthology, This Bridge We Call Home, Radical Visions for Transformation, alongside her. And later in her career, serving as her primary editor and close confidant. Now, just about 20 years after Anzaldúa's death, is heading up the efforts to bring the complexities of her thought into the mainstream. In all its intertwined spiritual, political, philosophical, and artistic iterations. After having coffee with AnaLouise this morning, I feel empowered to tell you all that my graduate study at Rice University in no small part began by holding a solitary seance in my apartment to commune with the spirit of Gloria Anzaldúa because I did not know how to be a mixed-race Mexican-American queer practitioner of any sort of spirituality in academia. So for all 5 of you who have read any of my research, you've officially read a seance paper. Anzaldúa's vision of reality was one informed by deep understandings of Western philosophy and occultism, depth psychology, both indigenous and modern roots of Mexican spirituality, the goddess worship and New Age movements, as well as the pain and marginalization brought by the material realities of her existence as a Chicana lesbian suffering from a slew of medical complications from infancy. The Anzaldúan world is one of possibility, untethered from consensus and political control, with her complex philosophy recognizing that what we refer to as the natural, what is possible, is necessarily a linguistic construction that is not always anchored in what is or how things could be, but rather often rooted in comforting fictions and mechanisms of control. To quote her pivotal volume, Borderlands La Frontera, The New Mestiza, humans fear the supernatural, both the undivine, the animal impulses such as sexuality, the unconscious, and the divine, the superhuman, the God in us. Culture and religion seek to protect us from these forces. Models of the natural, and therefore the supernatural, the possible, and the impossible must always be questioned. Here to guide us in this process of questioning is AnaLouise Keating.
Thank you. Okay, how's this? Do I sound, you can hear me? Okay, cool. I tend to move around, so I'm gonna try not to. We'll see how that goes. So thank you so much, Stefan, for that introduction. So I am not reading something that I wrote, except the PowerPoint, which I wrote. It takes me a long time to write papers, and so I didn't write one. So we'll see how that goes, but I am gonna, I probably have too much, like that was my goal, too much. So I'm setting my timer for 45 minutes, and then that will give us some time for conversation. If you don't want conversation and I have more to say, I could like fill up the rest of the time, but we'll see how it goes. So yes, this is what I'm gonna talk about. I do wanna start by giving thanks. Thank you, Jeff, for the invitation. Thank you for writing Authors of the Impossible, because I realized I could be an academic and start to let my freak out, you know? I could talk about impossible things, and writers who write about impossible things because they're only impossible because everybody keeps saying they are, right? And so I'm really happy for this opportunity to share with you a lot about Gloria Anzaldúa, and I hope everyone will get something out of it to take away and work with or whatever. And thank you to Rice University for making this possible. John, thank you for everything you did, the PowerPoints. They were due a while ago. I was looking at them this morning and I was like, oh, I wish I could change this or change that. But it was really nice not being able to, because that's the overthinking, right? And I love knowing that there's certain fonts that are better when people are viewing things. Yes, and then I want to thank whoever made sure there was vegan food and it was labeled. Living in Texas, that's rare. Trust me, that's pretty rare. And before we jump into it, I want us to do something a little different that we don't usually do at conferences, and that's just take a minute to do a very brief meditation, visualization. You're welcome to do it or not do it. I'm borrowed from Anzaldúa, and I'm going to work with a little bit with one of her theories as we do this. So it'll just take a couple minutes. Just center yourself. Maybe you close your eyes. Maybe you don't. Maybe you partially close your eyes. Whatever works for you. And just notice your breath. We breathe all the time, but a lot of times we don't even really notice it. So just let yourself take some full breaths. And then with your exhales, allow yourself to let go of any tension. Just relax. And then imagine from whatever part of yourself is touching the floor, your feet, from your tailbone, as if you're growing roots. And the roots go down through the chairs, through the floor, all the way deep into the ground. With each exhale, they grow a little deeper. And they go all the way to the center of the earth. And imagine there at the center of the earth, a cenote. Cenotes are those breaks in the earth where there's water. But imagine this one in the very center. Maybe it's filled with water, but it might be filled with light. And then as you inhale, start to bring that light up. Just allow it to bathe you. If that feels good, noticing the color, and just inhaling that. And then maybe you thank the earth. I mean, we all come from the earth, even though we tend to forget that, we humans. Or express a little gratitude or thank your breath. And then when you're ready, just come back to this present moment. Maybe blink your eyes, move around, take a drink of water if you have some. One of the really important parts of Anzaldúa's theories are this idea that we can go really deep into ourselves, but also connect with these very large forces or the archetypal or things like that. And her theory of el cenote is one of the ones that she was working on and coming back to at the end of her life. It's very rich. I have a book. I don't have a slide for my book, but it's a new book, the Anzaldúan Theory Handbook. I talk about that theory and others, so just giving a plug. All right, so why did we start? Why did I want us to start with a little meditation, visualization, whatever? First, to just remind ourselves that wisdom can be embodied, and our bodies have wisdom. So embodied wisdom is very important. Secondly, it's a little bit outside the norm, even outside the norm at a conference, which is outside the norm. Just turning within, taking our breath, paying a little attention to that. And then I have a quote from Gloria Anzaldúa. This is from one of her many, 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 many drafts for one of the chapters in Light in the Dark. By integrating reflective and contemplative practices into daily teaching and professional routines, we can take up our work with spiritedness and maintain our health. Even though Anzaldúa herself did have many health problems, breath work and other ways of returning to the body were very important to her throughout her life. I think when we're working on, whether we're in the academy or not, when we're working with ideas that are less accepted, it can be really good to have ways to fortify ourselves. If we're working on social justice issues, it's very important to have ways to fortify ourselves. And one of the things that Anzaldúa talked about, which doesn't get as much attention because, you know, people are like meditation, academics are often like things like meditation, that's too much woo-woo or something like that, right? But they can be really useful tools. Okay. So here's the questions that I will be kind of talking about. I have to make sure not to keep turning here. What can paranormal events, magical conversations, and non-ordinary realities teach us about ontological and ethical transformation? What new forms of social justice, research, and ethics emerge when we take seriously these impossible archives and other esoteric knowledge production? How can we use the impossible to make personal and collective social change? I'm very interested in knowledge. I love learning new things, but I want to see it applied. How can we apply it? I mean, our world, as other people have said, like, it's pretty messed up right now. I mean, one could say it always has been, sure. But the thing is, how are we humans not farther along, really? Like, why are we where we're at? Why are we not using some of these ideas? Why are we not learning from them in ways to make a more equitable world? So I'm curious about those questions. And one of my great draws to Anzaldúa is she always brought stuff like magic and spirit into social justice. And that is something that can be really useful. Not everyone would agree, of course. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call status quo stories. I'm going to share a little bit about Gloria Anzaldúa. I'm going to give you a short version of the public version of her life, just in case you're not familiar with it. Then I'm going to give you the occult version of Anzaldúa's life. And then I'm going to talk about how one of her well-known theories emerged from the occult in many ways, even though that's not the version that we typically hear about. And part of why I'm doing this is I'm trying to think about ways that this hidden knowledge, this outside the norm knowledge, can inform all of our work or our daily lives. I'm just curious about that. And so Anzaldúa provides these examples. Then I'm going to talk about what the title refers to, which is spiritual activism, which is a term that Anzaldúa used. She didn't coin it. And notice that spiritual is just the adjective, right? Activism is the noun. So it's about this, a different way, a different politics of spirit. And then concluding questions. I read this morning, and I'm like, what did I mean? I think I meant, like, we can just have questions. All of us. No answers, just questions. Okay, so let's go. So I'm going to tell you the story of my radiator. So a while ago, I had a job in Michigan. It was very cold. It snowed all the time. It was, like, super cold. And I had a radiator in my office. My office was not that pretty, but I had a radiator, and my desk sat right over the radiator with my computer right over the radiator, right? And it was an actual functioning radiator. I didn't know that until, like, December. And, like, it was going on and steaming up, and there was my computer. And so they're very friendly at the college where I worked. And someone who was like I don't know, maintenance or I don't know, came in and was like, is everything, you know, how's it going, right? Like, really friendly. I'm like, it's lovely, but I have a question. I'm worried about my computer because it's sitting over this radiator, and I'm worried that it's going to ruin the computer. I know I didn't buy the computer, but I'm worried about it. And he said, he like pondered it, and he said, it's always been there. And that was it. Like, that was it. Like, it's always been there. That's where it belongs. And I assume in his head he had some kind of logic going on. But I was so struck by it because I just really started thinking about how often things don't change because it's always been that way, right? And when we say it's always been that way, then we don't even think we can make change. So I use the term status quo stories. Like, I really pondered that because I was also reading a lot of stuff at that time about instances of, like, racism and a kind of, like, assumptions of a kind of like, well, now I think I would just say white supremacism, like this kind of like white supremacist thinking, but it was layered under, it's always been like this. This is how we do it in this city, right? And like no one questioned anything because this is just how it is. So I started thinking about status quo stories, and I wrote about them in one of my books, I think. Yeah. I use the term status quo stories to represent core beliefs about reality, assumptions so deeply embedded in our lives that they function as permanent facts. So how do they function? Well, they guide our expectations. If it's always been this way, that's just how it is, right? They direct our interactions. This is how you're supposed to act, because this is what the world is like. They restrict our imaginations, because it's always been this way. So it becomes harder to think differently, to think outside the box, let alone to break the box, or to even start tearing it apart. And they constrict our realities. You see how I slice through the plural? Because there's just one world. There's one reality. We have our material reality. A lot of people have talked about that kind of status quo. Really, it's like a status quo metaphysics or ontology that we have. And of course, it really limits our possibilities. So, and these are the kinds of phrases, right? It's always been this way. That's just the way things are. Here's one of my favorites. I hate it so much. It is what it is. That's like, that. You might as well be saying, I give up, right? It is what it is. Okay, and here's my Texas favorite. I'm from Chicago. People gonna do what people gonna do. No. No, we need a different ethics, right? We don't need a people gonna do what people gonna do. We need to invite people to think about what they're doing, and let's think about other ways of doing things that might work better. Oh, another good one. Don't rock the boat. Why not? Seriously, why not rock the boat? Or just live and let live. Like, these are ways that keep everything in place. But maybe all of the places aren't working well, right? And here's some common status quo stories that I see in US culture and in many Western cultures. Self-enclosed individualism. By this I mean that definition of the individual as a completely autonomous person that doesn't really rely on anybody. So we end with our skin, right? And this is the way we typically function. We really forget. We forget how reliant we are on so many systems, how reliant we are on other people, and how the fact that we have many creatures within us, right? We have a lot of stuff living in our eyes. We have all of the stuff in our intestines. Hopefully it's healthy stuff. I mean, so we ourselves are collectives, but we think of everything always as individualism. Survival of the fittest. He who dies with the most toys wins, right? So it's this kind of scrambling competition. Time is linear, right? And in the West, we tend to think, and it progresses. Spirits, ghosts, etc. are invisible. They don't exist, and so on. I'm pretty sure, I will not in a faculty meeting say something like, well, yes, I had a conversation with Gloria Anzaldúa the other day. I'm not going to do that because everybody sitting around that table would just, think quietly to themselves, whatever. Human exceptionalism. Humans are the best. We're at the top. We know the most. We should know everything. That kind of thinking as well we see often. And I'm not saying everybody thinks this way. I'm saying that these are some of the typical stories, the typical status quo stories that I have certainly seen. And then what Jackie Alexander calls mono-thinking, right? There's one right way. There's one way to do things. There's one way to think. We have a problem to solve. There's one solution. And she's actually using it when she's talking about groups of progressive activists who will split up from within because they argue about what is the right way to address a problem. There can only be one way. Maybe there are multiple ways, and maybe they're contradictory, and maybe we should try holding those contradictions. That's just not, that's just a harder one to wrap our heads around, and I don't think we do that enough. Okay. So let's redefine the possible. I have some quotes from Anzaldúa, and these are in her writing notas. So Anzaldúa also had an incredibly large archive. It's located at the University of Texas in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection. And she had thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of unpublished stuff. And so I'm going to be quoting from some of it because it will surprise no one. The most radical and the most radical of her writings have not been published. Light in the Dark is really getting there, but the most radical has not been published. So I'm going to pull from it today. Words and magic gain significance in times of crisis. When old forms of life are in dissolution, normal motives and incentives lose their efficacy. The prosaic and the matter-of-fact no longer satisfy. We need magic, the sense of the fantastic to lure us. We need incantations, myths to release our energies. And this is what Anzaldúa worked on. She saw this. This is from pretty early on. She saw this and she worked on to make this vision. Here's Anzaldúa, and I will tell you a little about the public story. This picture was probably taken in the late 1980s before she was diagnosed with diabetes 1, because after that diagnosis, she couldn't go walking in the ocean anymore because she had to worry about losing her feet. This is off of Santa Cruz, which is where she relocated. And it's like an iconic picture. We all love to use this picture. Okay. So I thought here's a public version of Anzaldúa. I took it from Wikipedia because I was curious too. So here's how she's described, at least when I pulled this maybe a month ago. Gloria Evangelina Anzaldúa, September 26, 1942 to May 15, 2004. This could actually be the anniversary of her death because she died alone and a friend found her body at some point. So that's an interesting. Was an American scholar of Chicana feminism, cultural theory, and queer theory. She loosely based her best-known book, Borderlands La Frontera, The New Mestiza, on her life growing up on the Mexico-Texas border and incorporated her lifelong experiences of social and cultural marginalization into her work. She also developed theories about the marginal, in-between, and mixed cultures that develop along borders. So she's very well known for Borderlands La Frontera. She's known for her theory and for being a Chicana feminist and her contributions to queer theory. She also was a poet and a creative writer. And in fact, for a really long time, she identified herself first and foremost as a poet. And I think this is relevant when we think about what all the different discussions about how art can be produced from paranormal experiences or the role of art. And it's also really important in terms of making sense of things as well as evoking change. So I'm going to tell you a little more about the public version of Anzaldúa. So the first book that she published was co-edited by her and Cherie Moraga, called This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color. This is the first version of it. That drawing is actually a drawing she made, but the version that she drew, the woman was like not so svelte, right? But the publisher thought, oh, svelte sells. I don't know what the publisher thought, I'm just saying that. But it is interesting, right? So This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color, was one of the first books. It was published in 1981. It was an early book to bring together women of color from various backgrounds, Asian American, Native American, African American, Chicana, Latina, different women who all were saying, we're feminists, white women, like what feminism is not white, right? So it was a really important collection by bringing together multiple voices and theorizing in multiple ways. This is the book she's best known for, Borderlands La Frontera, The New Mestiza. That drawing on the cover, she did it. She also was an artist, and it's the wind god. Anyways, the book is part prose and part poetry. It started as a book of poetry. The prose is what gets all the attention. The book was really timely. She really critiqued and wrote about borderlands in a very fluid and flexible way. She did code switching. She brought in Spanish, Nahuatl, many different dialects, we could say, and just wove them together in ways that were very empowering and helped to make it more legitimate in the academy. This is the book that's most excerpted. And it's really way too relevant considering it was published in 1987, honestly. My students should not be reading it and thinking it was written last week. But they do. And this is the book that was published posthumously, Light in the Dark, Luz en lo Oscuro, Rewriting Identity, Spirituality, Reality. And this is the one where she's talking about the imaginal. She's talking about spiritual activism. She's talking about, these are her most developed theories. All right, so her key contributions would be her theories of new mestiza and new mestiza consciousness. Mestizaje is often considered specifically a type of biological racial combination, we could say, often applied to Mexican Americans, Mexico. I'm completely oversimplifying it. There's a biological component, and she didn't ignore that, but she also thought more broadly about mixtures, whether it's mixtures of people or ideas, like new mestiza consciousness, and this liminal space where more transformation could occur. And so it was very innovative for the time. Her theory of the borderlands, whether it was Texas and Mexico, or whether it was just that sense of like multiple cultures or ways of thinking coming together, whether in the same person or multiple people, and the jarringness of it, but also the richness and the possibility for new ideas to emerge out of those contradictions. Nepantla is a later version of it. Code switching I mentioned already. Bringing together multiple genres in this really innovative way. Her work has been important for reminding feminist theory that feminist theory is diverse. and actually, she was using queer and doing queer theory before it hit the academy, right? And oh, interesting coincidence, she was at University of California, Santa Cruz, along with Teresa de Loretas and others who are usually attributed the origination of like queer theory. So that's an interesting point too. All right, so that's the Anzaldúa people usually know about. This is what I'm contending. Anzaldúa's outward-facing, conventional though innovative work was fueled by her occult experiences and studies. Today, I rummage through Anzaldúa's archives and dive under her public career to offer a politics of spirit, or what we, Gloria y yo, call spiritual activism, a theory and praxis that greatly expands our possibilities, making the impossible possible and concretely real. So let me define the occult. And I'm taking this definition by William Gray in his book, Magical Ritual Methods. This is a book that Anzaldúa owned. And it has marginalia in it. I'm really excited to go back to the Benson and see what she underlined. Because like I just got a copy recently and read it, and I was like, wow, I can really see these interesting like connections. Anyways, so here's the definition of occult that I'm using. An occult or magical mystery is a psychophysical interarrangement between intelligent entities existing in differing dimensions of being for some mutual purpose. The word occult means that the matter has unrealized extensions beyond the normal limits of its operative consciousness, and also that it is concealed from those excluded from its workings. So it's hidden. There's multiple communities, right? Different intelligent entities, and there's these different dimensions or realities, right? So there's a lot going on in that definition, and I mean all of that when I'm thinking about the occult Anzaldúa. So here we go, beyond the status quo. This is a quote from an interview that Anzaldúa gave, I think, in the early 90s. The safe elements in borderlands are procreated and used, and the unsafe ones are not talked about. One of the things that doesn't get talked about is the connection between body, mind, and spirit. Anything that has to do with the sacred, anything that has to do with the spirit, as long as it's theoretical, and if it's about history or borders, that's fine. But if you start talking about Nepantla, this border between the spirit, the psyche, and the mind, they don't want to. So it's in Borderlands La Frontera, there's these supernatural components and these allusions to spirit, and she's really using that as part of her politics. But for the longest time, scholars just ignored that. They didn't want to talk about that. And like I had a lot of trouble getting stuff published when I tried to talk about it. I had to start talking about epistemology. And brought in a little post-structuralism, and it was fine. Yeah, I know, right? It's like so funny. Like it just had to be harder to understand. Yeah. So here's my favorite of Anzaldúa's self-definitions. This is a definition that she gave in La Prieta, which was an essay she wrote in 1981, and it was published in this bridge called My Back. And, well, I'll just read it and then talk about it. I am a wind-swayed bridge, a crossroads inhabited by whirlwinds. Gloria the facilitator, Gloria the mediator, straddling the walls between abysses. Your allegiance is to La Raza, the Chicano movement, say the members of my race. Your allegiance is to the third world, say my Black and Asian friends. Your allegiance is to your gender, to women, say the feminists. Then there's my allegiance to the gay movement, to the socialist revolution, to the New Age, to magic and the occult. And there's my affinity to literature, to the world of the artist. What am I? A third world lesbian feminist with Marxist and mystic leanings. They would chop me up into little fragments and tag each piece with the label. You say my name is ambivalence? Think of me as Shiva, a many-armed and legged body with one foot on brown soil, one on white, one in straight society, one in the gay world, the man's world, the women's, one limb in the literary world, another in the working class, the socialist, and the occult worlds, a sort of spider woman hanging by one thin strand of web. Who? Me? Confused? Ambivalent? Not so. Only your labels split me. I love this. She, at a time when politics were, we're back there now, it seems like sometimes, when you can only like have one issue, choose one group, or choose one identity, or choose one whatever. Anzaldúa's like, no, I'm not going to reject anybody. I'm going to have all these causes. I don't care if you're not supposed to be Marxist and a mystic. I'm going to do it. And then she flips the script and says, I'm not the problem, it's the rules. What's wrong? Why do we have these rules? What's wrong with these rules? And that's part of thinking outside the box. Why are we in a box? You know? So that's Anzaldúa. I'll tell you a little more about her. She was born in 1942 in Raymondville, Texas, near the Texas border. School, yeah. So she started school in 1948. The name on her birth certificate was not the same as the name that the teacher called. So she didn't answer because she didn't know her name because it was different, and the teacher actually made her stand in a corner and wear a dunce cap. There's an Anglo teacher. The kids were all Mexican-American. And the teacher made assumptions. So Anzaldúa, to prove all of the teachers wrong, performed well in school, was really smart. It was kind of like a screw you, right? You know, she started with speaking Spanish, so she ended up like majoring in English, etc. I jumped ahead. 1948, so she was 6. She went through puberty entirely, right? She talks about it in La Prieta. She started like a little bit of bleeding, like even when she was a small baby. But when she was 6, she completely went through puberty. So she grew to her full height, which was less than 5 feet. So she was thin. She was taller than everybody else in her class. And she hid having breasts and a period starting at the age of 6. And I think it's important to talk about like this physical difference. And she was a Spanish speaker, and she was Mexican American in Texas, you know, and she was a woman. So there were all these like differences, but it was especially, I think, well, I know this because I asked her about it. Like this is the one that really not only marked her, but gave her this radical empathy with others, right? She really could identify and lean in with when people felt outside. Felt alien. 1948, also pretty early, she encountered a Nahual, and she writes about it. And later she talks about it as her Nahuala. So I don't even know how to describe it. A guide. It's more than that. 1957, so she was still pretty young. Her father died, and that was like she was done with religion then. You know, that was it. It made no sense. It was an unexpected death. 1963 to 1968, she went to college. So she had this, even early, it's really clear from her unpublished writings, she had a sense of like wanting to be great and wanting to write. I have to give a shout out to my school. She did do her first year at Texas Women's University. And why don't we have a building named after her? I don't understand it. We have a building that's named something like Classroom Building. Call it Anzaldúa. I mean, come on. Anyways, so she finished college. It took her a little longer than the conventional 4 years. She worked to put herself through school. Then she worked as a teacher. And I think it's important to talk about like how normal her life was in many ways and how many different kinds of experiences she had because she's speaking out of all of them. She worked as a teacher to be different from the teachers she had. K through 12, and in the summer she went to graduate school at UT Austin to get a master's in English and education. Then she went to Indiana, where for a year she was the liaison between the migrant workers' kids and the school system. And actually she wrote really important parts of Borderlands there. People keep thinking Borderlands is only about Texas, but she wrote it all over the place because, because there's a lot of similar experiences. Then she went to a PhD program, she studied comp lit. Each of these things she did, it was like, where can I make a change? Where can I make a change? This is where she became a feminist. This is where she started reading lots of occult literature. She read channeled literature. Anybody in here know Jane Roberts' books, the Seth books, Seth Speaks, all of that? Yeah, she read all of those. She took those books with her whole life. Like they were right there in the bookshelf next to her bed, like, at the time of her death even. So these were all really important books. And she kept, but then in 1977 she decided, that's not the way to make the change. Like being a professor is not going to do it. So she decided to commit her life to La Musa Bruja, what she called her inspiration, and her writing, and she went to California. She never took a full-time job after that, right? She went on food stamps. She worked part-time. Her family supported her, sent her money when they could, but she really committed herself to the writing. And here's what she says about that. In San Francisco, I confronted my nawal, my shadow self, my inner guide. There I embraced death. She has this very dramatic, unpublished autobiography. But she had several near-death experiences, and this is where she had one of them. She lived on the East Coast from 81 to 85. And these are all kind of like these ritual moves and development process. In need of a new right, one that discards oppression like an old coat, I moved from San Francisco to the East Coast, del Mar Pacifico a la Mar Atlante. I carry with me $230, a few raggedy clothes, my books, my portable altar of crystal, candle, I Ching, divination stones, tarot, and incense. I stay with friends, sleep in the bed of people I barely know, 13 beds in 30 days. So she stayed with different people. She was supporting herself by teaching writing. She taught writing at, maybe in Connecticut. And she did, this bridge was out, and so she did readings and would get paid like pretty small amounts of money to come to talk at universities. Esperando la serpiente con plumas is one of her unpublished autobiographies. It's pretty cool. Then 87, she wrote Borderlands, and she became a Chicana lesbian feminist. She was really that identity was really elevated. She spoke as that identity. 1989, she returned to a doctoral program, University of California, Santa Cruz. She applied to the History of Consciousness program. They turned her down. She had already published Borderlands La Frontera, which is about mestiza consciousness, but they turned her down from the History of Consciousness program. I've heard it, anyways, and so she went in the American Literature program. And I think that's important because, like, if you're a woman of color and you had, like, way back teachers who were like, you're stupid or whatever, and then you, like, think you, like, broke through something and you think you can apply to this program that's doing the kinds of things you write about and you're turned down, like, what does that do to your ability to produce more writing? How does that make you think you have to be more of a perfectionist or work harder? It has to have had an impact. Anyways, and then in 92, she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And the rest of her life, she really struggled with it. She published, How Do You Get Health Insurance If You Don't Have a Full-Time Job? There was a writer's guild, but it was pretty expensive. It was a lot. And in 2004, she died from diabetes-related complications. Okay. So that was a lot. Here's another quote. When adversity bends us but doesn't break us, our spirits are forged in unconquerable metal. La guerrillera divina, strong within, sparing of words without, full of deeds, staking her life on following her will, becoming true to herself. For us, adversity, instead of breaking our spirit, it has strengthened it. So all of those experiences went into Anzaldúa's work. She used them all. They were all part of what, in my book, I think I talk about as like an engine, right? She created from that. So that was another kind of like, that was more information, but that was just the ordinary story of her life. Here's some other parts. She had personal mystic and psychic experiences. She had encounters with her nawal, not just one that she writes about, but several. Her family had experiences with curanderas. One of her grandmothers was a curandera, so a healer. She writes about that in Light in the Dark. She had a very intimate relationship with the land. The land was not just like I'm walking around on the ground. It was alive, like the trees were alive. It's alive. She, in Light in the Dark, she talks about the communion she's in with a certain tree. She goes to this tree when she has problems. She like opens herself up to it, and through a meditative process, she sometimes gets answers. So it's a very intersubjective relationship with the land. She had out-of-body experiences. She had so vastation is the word I learned when I was studying William James, right? So I'm using it in the sense that some biographers write about James. Vastation is that frozen in bed and you can't move and you feel like there's a huge spirit on you and you just can't move. She had several of those as well. She did research into indigenous philosophies, myths, and worldviews. This is what she started when she was in graduate school, the more in-depth research, because it all confirmed her experiences, right? There's nothing like reading in a book something that's happened to you, and we've talked about this too in some of these talks. It's like, yes, I'm seen, right? And she used a lot of spiritual tools. So the I Ching, she threw the coins regularly, like all the time. She read tarot. She was very into astrology, and I don't mean sun sign, what's your horoscope astrology. I mean, she studied it. She has a whole journal that's her making charts, like making natal charts from scratch, because you had to back then. Sabian symbols, which Dane Rujar talks about. Does anybody in here know what they are? Okay, a couple people, cool. Dane Rujar was a very important humanistic astrologer. So in the mid-20th century, and the Sabian symbols are a set of like channeled little visuals, 360, so one for each degree of the zodiac, and Dane Rujar turned them into what he calls an American mandala. So a kind of, not fortune-telling, but a kind of system for like learning, kind of fortune, but more than that. Anyways, Anzaldúa like really used them. Like when I said to her, Gloria, I want to learn about astrology, what should I read? She told me to read Dane Ruger's book on Sabian symbols. Okay, pendulum. She used a pendulum a lot. You hold up something heavy and what is yes, what is no, and you ask questions. Like once she even, I was staying with her for a while, and she was getting ready to give her dosage of insulin, and she was like, here, do the pendulum for me. Should I do this or that? And I was like, I was not where I am now at that time. I was just like, no, that's crazy. Do it yourself. It's your body. You have to ask your body. And altar making. She had altars all over her house. And yoga. Sri Aurobindo was a really important influence on her. And in an interview book, she actually talks about feeling that she was visited by Aurobindo in her dreams after he died, right? So like there's all of these occult seedlings that I think are really instrumental in her theories and her worldview and are very useful. Okay, so, and as one example of this, I want to talk about the occult emergence of La Facultad. And if you have read the Superhumanities, you've read Jeff writing about it, which he does very nicely. So La Facultad, this is Anzaldúa's description of it in Borderlands La Frontera. This is the published version. The capacity to see in surface phenomena the meaning of deeper realities, to see the deep structure below the surface. It is an instant sensing, a quick perception arrived at without conscious reasoning. It is an acute awareness mediated by the part of the psyche that does not speak, that communicates in images and symbols which are the faces of feelings, that is, behind which feelings hide. The one possessing this sensitivity is excruciatingly alive to the world. So La Facultad, we could say, oh, it's intuition, and it kind of is, but it's also a kind of full-bodied, deeply embodied awareness and sensing Often, Anzaldúa talks about how it often emerges from people who are, subjugated because you don't want to get hit again. So you just develop this awareness. People of color, domestic violence, and many ways that one could use that. But she's really clear. It's in everybody. It's just whether we awaken it or not. So she's talking about another way of perceiving reality. Okay, so that's the published version. All right, here's her draft version, one of many drafts. Sabian symbol, Libra 24. A butterfly spreads its wings, showing an extra left one. This symbol represents the ability to develop for inner strengthening new modes of response to basic life situations. The left side is the instinctual side of consciousness, the heart side. Some power has been added to the normal spiritual life of the individual. A new strength is shown, a new faculty, a kind of mutation, an expansion of the instinctive self. We possess a kind of instant sensing, a quick perception without conscious reasoning, a knowledge from within, an intense intuition. So this is her. She's just kind of like riffing on it, right? We must see the hidden meaning or signature of every occurrence. Signature is Ruger's term, which he's taking from some esoteric writings. Our survival is at stake. We need to develop and use systems and techniques that will clarify the chaotic situations we are presently immersed in. It is not enough to perceive what is happening in El Salvador or in Israel. We need to see through these events and how they are related to our lives and the life of the planet and what they have to do with archetypal and life processes. So all of this went into her theory of la facultad, which we sometimes reduce to a kind of intuition. But she's also she's thinking urgently about these big problems and how do we address them. So I think this is a very cool quote. It goes on. What I'm talking about is political and personal clairvoyance, the capacity to see in surface events the meaning of deeper realities. And then she's referring to that Dane Ruger book. Well, actually, here she's referring to Dane Ruger, Capricorn 29. We have developed an extra faculty, a sense that spots danger and ill winds in our streets and in our bedrooms. We need to cultivate this faculty. So she's writing, this is in Esperando la Serpiente, the autobiography that I've been quoting. Wow, I'm almost out of time. And that's the Dane Ruger. Okay, so here's some early archival statements that I think speak to spiritual activism and to some cool stuff. Heal the body, the psyche, then heal the earth and society. So it's this dual kind of healing process. Change our lives, change the world, work on self, work on society. The issues that are important to me, the issues I deal with in my personal communal life, how to bring closer to each other the extreme interact with the extreme social, how to reconcile the political spiritual split in myself and others, fusing witching with politicking. So it's this, and this is from 81. It's that idea of how do we use this spiritual stuff, this occult stuff, all of this stuff, both to make personal change, healing change, and also to, change the world. So spiritual activism has some key topics, concepts, a metaphysics of radical interconnectedness, a multidimensional overlapping, interlocking realities, the plasticity of physical temporal reality. So this is me and Anzaldúa. I'm really building on her at this point or adding stuff or I don't know. Humans' potential, both probably. Alignment as praxis, coming into a certain kind of alignment and using that as the source of our activism, our actions, our changing the world, our living our lives. A relational selfhood, so replacing that self-enclosed individualism with a sense of relationality, the individual in relation and collectives in relation. An ethics of radical interconnectedness. If everything is interconnected, what does that mean for how we act? And spiritual technologies, how can we use tarot in our research? How can, and different questions like that. All right. So metaphysics of radical interconnectedness, this is a term that I came up with reading Anzaldúa and Audre Lorde and Paula Gunn Allen. And I was like, what are they doing here? How are they making these claims? And I decided it's in different ways, they're positing this idea that everything is interconnected, sacred, and saturated with meaning. All reality emerges from shared ontological ground or being that embodies itself throughout and as all existence. This fluid cosmic spirit, energy, consciousness, doesn't matter what you call it, is both source, substance, is both source, substance, it's the framework and creative force underlying, infusing, and shaping all that exists. And I call it radical because I would argue that it's foundational. We're profoundly interrelated with everything, whether we see it or not. Even the air we breathe, right? So we have 7 minutes. I feel like I want to just stop and see if there's any questions. And if there's not, I'll keep talking, but I like questions, so. Any questions? Oh, yes. Absolutely.